All right, guys, let's take a look at today's assignment and what we're going to be covering in this installment of today's lecture. Now, I wanted to create a video because it's going to serve as a great reference, because I guarantee you guys you're going to come into certain times when you're going to be frustrated with how to do things, right? So the video will give you a good reference point to kind of look back and understand how to get certain commands. So everything we're gonna do in this lesson is gonna be cover what we gone over in today's class. So the first thing we're gonna do is, these are your assignments, and you'll notice in the tabs we're gonna be mainly going within these first four. And the first one we're gonna do is task 1, and if you click on that, it's gonna take us to this text to column. And what you have here is a string of data. Now, oftentimes, whenever you need to get data put together, sometimes you'll take it offline or what have you. And when you paste it into Excel, what it'll do sometimes is it'll put all that data into one exact cell. For instance, everything right now is in this one cell. And that can be problematic because we want to actually run specific data, and Excel won't know where to pull it from. But the great thing about that is Excel can actually put all this into columns for us. And an easy way to do it is, if you take all this data, and actually, because it's all in column A, we're going to highlight everything in column A. And a quick way to do that is to click in that first cell. You're going to hit Control Shift down. And what it did, it just selected all the cells all the way down until where there was a break, meaning there's no more data beyond that. Now, if you click on the Data tab up here at the top, and you click on Text to Columns, what you're going to tell Excel to do is you're going to separate all that data into separate columns. Now, for now, this gets kind of confusing, but for now, you just need to know delimited. So you're going to click on delimited and hit Next. Now, what Excel is asking you right here is, how are these being delimited? And the way they're being delimited is actually by spaces. So every space that Excel comes across, it's going to put it into an Excel, or a new cell, or a new column. So you go in and you click space, and then it gives you a preview of what it's going to look like. And if you want to look what other ones will look like, you can kind of click on and see the preview. And notice it's not going to do anything, so we want to do space. And that's all we need to know, so we just hit finish. And what Excel did is it just kind of cleaned up all that data to where it's now in usable form. So that was your first task. Now the next task is, we're going to label each one of these columns, because we're going to make an actual table. Now, rather than going back and forth and labeling each column with the respective header, we're going to do it really easily. We're going to select everything in this box, and we'll hit Control Copy, or Control C, or Command C if you're a Mac user, and we're going to just paste it anywhere. Then we're going to copy it again by Control C or Control or Command C. Go over to Text to Column, click right above the box, and if you right click on your mouse and it goes right here to paste options, you can hit this transpose, and what it did is it just basically pasted everything in a horizontal view. It makes it really simple, makes it really fast to get data in specific ways. Now let's clean up some things here before we actually make this into a table. So our next task is to name the table TBL Data Player Database. Now that's going to come in handy later on. But before we do that, let's just do some things to kind of clean up all this. Notice that all these numbers right now, they're in a very general format, and we don't want that. We want to put it in something more readable. So to do that, as you just saw, you would just select or highlight those string of cells, and then you put it into a number format. And what I did there is, if you did that, you click on the home page, the home tab, and you go in a number. Now let's do the same thing across the board. with these variables. And there you have it, pretty easy. Now we're going to create a table here, but one thing that we want to do is that first name and last name is somewhat separated, but what we want to do is we actually want to put them together. Now I'm not going to test you guys on this, but it's something to have in the future. If you type in, we're going to put a name, and we're going to combine these two things. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to hit equals, click on that first string of cells, and if we put ampersand sign and then quotations, space, quotation, ampersand sign, and then the cell that we want to combine, and we hit enter, what it is, we just combined those two cells together, and it also gave us a space there, which is a pretty handy tool. But we want to do the same thing for every single one of those names. Now rather than going each one, all you have to do is put your cursor on that little box on the bottom of the cell, double click, and what it does is it just combined all that data for us. Now that we have that, we don't need that, but notice that this is in a function format. So we don't need these, but look what happens when I delete these. This no longer has a reference point. So we're going to get that back. We're going to get Control Z, and to go back one, we're going to highlight these by Shift Control down. We just select all those. Control C, and now I'm going to repaste it by right clicking, and I'm going to paste options, and all I want is the values, right? If I were to paste this or this, it would give me the function, but we just want the values. So we hit that, and now the values are there, and now we can delete these two columns, and we still have our data. Pretty cool so far. And let's just straighten this up a bit. So now everything is kind of where we want it to be. Now the thing is, we want to create a table. Now you might be thinking, well, let me pause there. That completes task 2. Now we're on to task 3. We want to take the table that we just created, and we want to name it table player database. Now to do so, I always like to name the table that I'm using right above it. That way I don't forget where it is, and I understand what it's telling. And I'll just italicize it. Now, even though this is a table, you haven't told Excel that this is a table. All Excel knows is that it's just a string of data organized in both rows and columns. But we want Excel to actually know that this is a table. So what we do is we're going to click inside the string of data here, and we hit insert, and then we hit table. And what that told Excel is that we just created a table, and it just highlighted all that string of data without any breaks. Now the thing is, you always want, if you have headers, as we just put into our table, we want to click yes, and then you hit OK, and then there we go, we have a table. Now this is going to come in very handy in the next function, as you'll see. So, but the cool thing about that is if we click on the name box, we just created a table and it shows us that. Now what we want to do though is we want to rename this table. So if we click back in it and we go to table design, if you notice that when I click out of it, that tab disappears. I click back in it and you go and we give it, click on table design, and let's rename this what we just called it right here. And we named it TBL underscore player database. And then hit enter, and then there we go, we have a table. So that completes both task 1, 2, and 3, where we completed a table, or we made a table, we fixed any formats and dates and numbers, and then there were no blanks in our table. But now we're going to collectively put some things together that we did earlier. And if we click on VLOOKUP, you'll notice that I have a string of cells here that I want you guys to fill out to automate a dynamic subtable. Now, the way we're going to do that is if you guys can recall from the first chapter, we need to create a list of names. And that's a pretty easy thing to do. But what we're going to do is we're going to head back to our table, player database. And in these names, where it says name, we're going to hit Control Shift down. And that's going to highlight all that for us. And we hit in the name box, we're going to call this list names. Enter. Now if we click down on this name box again, there are our two things that we just created. We created a list of names and a player database. If we go back to VLOOKUP or Lookup tab, where it says list of names, now we want to create a data validation list right there. And to do that, we're going to click on the Data tab, all the way down to Data Tools. You should see a little thing like this. It should say Data Validation. If you hit that drop down box, you click Data Validation, and we want to create a list. Click List. And where do we want that list to come from? Well, we could do it like this. We could hit equals list names. But sometimes if you don't spell it correctly, and even if the letter is not capitalized or is capitalized, it won't know where to pull it from. So an easy way to do it is if you hit F3. Oh, I'm sorry. For some of you guys, it might be function F3, but if you hit F3, it'll give us the list that we've already created. And we insert that there. Whoops. And we hit OK. And now what we just did is we have a list. Now what we want to do is we want to have body mass, height, and age in that table. Now a cool and easy way to do this without having to flip back and forth between column to column, because there's going to be times when you're going to need to extract data from a table into a separate tab where you don't want to have to keep flipping back and forth because it's going to mess up your function. So creating a table just made it a lot easier, and I'll show you how. So if you hit equal, and we want to use the VLOOKUP function, right? And what do we want to look up? We want to look up this figure right here in the list of names. So we hit it VLOOKUP. What value do we want to look up? We want to look up this in cell D10. And now where do we want to look that up at? Well, we want to look it up into the table database. So if we actually just type TBL, it actually brings it up for us. And so now I just brought up table database. And if we hit comma, now we do need to look up, we do need to go over back again to, alright, sorry about that, let me restart. So to recap, the table is going to come in handy to extract data, but we do need to look up a certain thing when it comes to VLOOKUP. But once we look into index match, it gets easier. So just to recap, we're going to hit equals VLOOKUP. We want to look up this list of names. Where do we want to look that up? We want to look it up into table, data, table, database. The column that we want to look up. Now before we switch over to column index, it's a good idea to just come over here in the address bar and then hit space, and that way it doesn't mess up our formula. We want to look up body mass. We click over, and body mass is in 1, 2, 3rd column index. We go back, we click backspace to turn this back into a function. It's our 3rd column index. We hit comma, and we go down to false because we want it to be an exact match. Close parentheses and hit enter. And now we just extracted our data from Stephanie Nolan from the table player database. And you can see now we have somewhat of a dynamic chart. But now let's do this for the rest of them. Now what we could do, the great thing about this is all we can do, now that's a player database, is always going to pull from that database. We can just drag this over. But notice it just gives us an NA, because what it's doing is we didn't lock in that value. So let's go back. So we lock that in by hitting F4 or function F4. Now it's locked in and I can drag this over. But what it's going to do, it's going to always pull from that third column index from right here. But we want to look up body height, which is in 1, 2, 3, 4. So all we have to do is come in here, change that to 4. And then we want to look up age, which is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boom. And now we just created a dynamic chart of data. Now this comes in a lot handy when we're doing dynamic charts, because essentially we can graph this data one day, which we'll come into later on in this class. And it can make the data individualized for a specific person or a data point. So that basically covers VLOOKUP. Now let's do the same thing for HLOOKUP. Now the thing is with HLOOKUP, it's pretty much the same thing, whereas VLOOKUP is going vertical and HLOOKUP is going horizontal. Now what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a list called weeks, because we're going to put that right there. So we're going to highlight this string of data, go into the name box, list weeks, enter, and now we just created a list called list weeks. Now we want to put that list right there. To do so, we go back to the data tab, which we're already on, go to data validation, list. Where do we want that list to come from? Well, we hit F3. We want it to come from weeks, hit OK, and there we have it. Now we want to put our function right in the string of data. So we hit equals, and this time it's HLOOKUP, and we want to look up week 2. This time we're going to actually manually select our table, so we're going to select the whole table. And what row do we want to look up? Well, it's body mass, so we want to look up row 1, 2, comma, we want an exact match, close parentheses, enter, and there we have it. So body mass for week 2 or week 3, it changes dynamically. Now let's do the same thing for age and position using the HLOOKUP function. Now one way we can do that is we can copy all this down, but nothing right now is locked in, right? But we're going to do that right now. We go back to our address or formula bar, and we hit F4. We hit F4, and we do the same thing with the table. And what that's telling is, it's telling Excel to lock those data points in. So now I drag it down, and that formula stays intact. But again, now it's still pulling from that second row, and this time we wanted to pull from the age position, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we want also position, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boom. And that's an easy example of how you do an HLOOKUP. Pretty simple. Now here's the next one. It gets a little bit more challenging. We're going to create using the index function. But just like we did in class, we're going to use the index match function, which is something that really is going to help you out later on. It's going to really help you to kind of like speed up a lot of this process. Rather than looking up VLOOKUP, we just use index, and index can it's a little bit more robust than using just VLOOKUP alone or XLOOKUP. Now to do so, what we're going to do is we're going to create two lists right here. And the list that we already have one of those lists, but let's just recreate another one. So let's just select all that data, and we're going to call this list names 2, enter. And we want to create this list here. I want to call this list year. Just like before, go to data validation, list, F3, it was list names 2. Okay, now we have that. And now we want to do year, so data validation, list, already has it for us. Okay, boom. Now we want to create a variable, right? And what I mean by the variable is these variables right here. What we want this section of data to tell us, if we want to find out the name and the year, and we want to find out a specific variable, a data point. Now what we're going to do is we're also going to create another list with these right here. And we're going to call this list variable. And we're going to put that right here. So now in our table here to the left, we have a list for the name, a list for the year, and then we have a list a list for the variables across the top. Now what it's going to help us do is we're going to create a dynamic chart to kind of tell us the name, the year, and then the variable that we select. Now the thing is we need to do an index match where it's a little bit more advanced, where we're actually going to look at two things within a row. Now to do that, we're going to hit equals index, and what do we want to index? We want to index all this data here. So we're going to click there, Control Shift right, down, and that just selected all that data. And while we're here, let's just go ahead and lock it in by F4. Now it's asking us what row do we want to look up. Well, we want to look up these two rows, but we want it to match these two cells here. So we want to hit match this name. You're going to hit the shift key and then the 7 key, and it gives us what we call an ampersand. So we want name and year, comma, and now where do we want to look that up? We want to look it up in these two rows. So we're going to go here, click in the first cell where it says name, all the way down. You're going to hit shift 7 or the and. You're going to look it up in these two columns. And what kind of a match do we want? We want an exact match. Close that. Now we're done with the row. You hit comma, and now it's going to ask us what column we want to look up. Now the column that we want to look up is the variable right here. To do that, we're going to hit match, body mass, and we want to look up across the top here. So we're going to highlight the headers. We want an exact match. Close parentheses. Now you notice once I close those parentheses, it wasn't done yet. Our our formula is still up and it's still asking us there's something left. To do that, all we have to do is hit one more close parentheses and now we're good to go. Now we hit enter and we have it. We have our data. So when Anna Hunter was a junior, her body mass was 69 kilograms. What about when she was a freshman? It was 54. When she was a senior, it was 66. Let's look up another. Let's look up Stephanie Nolan. And what about, let's just look up, say, squat 1RM. And there you have it, a dynamic chart using index match. And this is just a way or an example that you can use these functions to extract data very quickly.